The emergency alarm screamed through the massive crystal halls of the Galactic Council station. The sound bounced off the walls like angry ghosts, making everyone's skin crawl. Admiral Vextar, a towering creature with 4 muscular arms and skin like black leather, brought his fist down hard on the holographic control panel. The impact sent ripples through the floating display showing star charts and fleet positions. 300 ships, he growled, his voice deep enough to shake the floor. 300 of our best warships, gone without sending even a distress signal. The hologram flickered, showing the empty space where the Malakari Empire's most powerful Armada should have been patrolling. Each red dot that had disappeared represented a ship carrying over 1,000 crew members, families, soldiers, engineers, all vanished like smoke in the wind. Commander Thys stood up from her chair, her snake-like body uncoiling to its full 8-foot height. Her scaled green skin reflected the blue light from the hologram, and her yellow eyes burned with frustration. "This makes no sense," she hissed, her forked tongue flicking out as she spoke. "The Devastator-class battleships alone pack enough firepower to turn an entire planet into space dust. Each one has shields that can stop a supernova. How does something like that just disappear?" Around the circular chamber, representatives from dozens of alien species whispered nervously among themselves. The Caltharians, with their crystalline bodies, chimed like broken glass. The insect-like Vorthak clicked their mandibles in worried patterns. Even the proud Centaurians, who usually acted like they owned the galaxy, looked scared. But at the far end of the room, sitting alone in the deep human section, Ambassador Jamin Park remained perfectly still. His dark eyes stared at the swirling star map without blinking, as if he was seeing something the others couldn't. The silence from the human representative was making everyone uncomfortable. Usually, humans were the first to jump into any conversation, with wild theories, clever solutions, or at least some kind of joke to break the tension. An elderly Altarian delegate slowly stood up, his thin blue body trembling. His people were known for their long lifespans and even longer memories. "There are stories," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the humming of the station's life support systems. "Old tales that spacers tell when they're drunk and far from home. Stories about a ghost ship that hunts in the empty darkness between galaxies." The chamber fell quiet except for the soft breathing of 100 different species. The Altarian's pale blue skin seemed to glow with fear as he continued. "They say it appears out of nowhere, like a shadow made real. They say it doesn't destroy ships, it feeds on them, drains the life energy from entire crews until they're nothing but empty shells floating in space." Admiral Vextar's forearms crossed over his massive chest. "Superstitious garbage," he snorted, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. "We're not children sitting around a campfire telling scary stories. We need real answers, not ancient fairy tales." But the Altarian wasn't finished. His ancient eyes, which had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations, were fixed on something far away. "The stories say the ship appears when someone threatens what it protects. When someone gets too close to something it considers sacred." "And what exactly is it supposed to be protecting?" Commander Thys asked, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Before the Altarian could answer, all eyes turned to the human section. Ambassador Jamin Park had finally moved. He stood up slowly, straightening his simple black uniform. His movement was smooth and controlled, like a predator getting ready to strike. The entire chamber held its breath. "Sometimes myths exist. For a reason, Admiral," Jamin said, his voice cutting through the silence like a laser blade. Each word was carefully chosen, delivered with the kind of calm that made everyone's survival instincts scream warnings. "Sometimes they're not stories at all. Sometimes they're warnings." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Admiral Vextar's 4 hands clenched into fists, but something in the human's tone made him hesitate. Commander Thys's scales rippled with nervous energy, and her tongue flicked out to taste the sudden tension in the air. "What do you know about this?" Vextar demanded, his voice lower now, more dangerous. But before Jamin could answer, the station's deep space sensors suddenly exploded with activity. Warning lights flashed red throughout the chamber. The main display erupted with energy readings that made no sense, power signatures that broke every known law of physics. The readings were coming from Sector 7 Delta, the exact coordinates, where 300 warships had vanished without a trace. Something was out there, something that had been waiting in the darkness between the stars, and now it was moving. Captain Zolok stared out at the graveyard of ships floating in the black void of space and felt his 3 hearts skip a beat. He was a veteran of 40 space battles, had faced down pirate fleets and survived 3 different wars, but nothing had prepared him for this sight. The scout ship, Shadow's Edge, drifted slowly through what used to be the most powerful armada in the galaxy. "I should have stayed home," he muttered, his grey skin pale with shock. "Should have taken that desk job on the homeworld." The debris field stretched out in every direction, but calling it debris wasn't quite right. These weren't the twisted remains of destroyed ships. The massive warships floated intact, their hulls unmarked by weapons fire, no scorch marks from laser cannons, no holes from plasma torpedoes. They looked perfect from the outside, like a fleet that had simply decided to take a nap in the middle of space. "Sir," Communications Officer Rallen called out, his voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. The young officer's hands trembled as he worked his control panel. "I'm picking up something strange from the flagship Decimator." Zolok turned his attention to the massive battleship floating dead ahead. The Decimator was the size of a small city, bristling with enough weapons to level a planet. Its dark hull reflected the light from distant stars, but there was something wrong about the way it sat in space. It was too still, too quiet. "What kind of readings?" Zolok asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Life signs, sir, but they're weird." Rallen's 4 eyes blinked in confusion as he studied his instruments. "The crew is still alive, but barely. It's like they're sleeping, but not really sleeping. More like they're in some kind of deep hibernation that our sensors can barely detect." The captain felt ice water run through his veins. "All 15,000 crew members?" "Every single one, sir. Same readings from all the other ships, too. They're all alive, but just barely." Zolok had been in space long enough to know that when something seemed impossible, it usually meant you were in serious trouble. He was about to order a full retreat when his tactical officer, a massive creature named Grix with arms like tree trunks, suddenly screamed like he'd been shot. "Contact!" Grix roared, his deep voice echoing through the small bridge. "Something huge. Bearing 27 Mark 8. It's coming out of nowhere." Everyone on the bridge spun around to look at the main display screen. At first, there was nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then, the darkness itself seemed to move. The ship that emerged from the cosmic void was like nothing in any database, nothing from any species' technology records. It didn't fly through space so much as flow through it, like liquid shadow given form and purpose. The hull was so black it seemed to eat light, making it hard to look at directly. It was as if someone had cut a piece out of reality itself and shaped it into a vessel. "What in the name of the 7 moons is that thing?" Zolok whispered. The mysterious ship was enormous, easily the size of the Decimator, but it moved with the grace of a hunting cat. Strange symbols pulsed along its surface with a sickly green light. The markings seemed to shift and writhe when you looked at them, making your eyes water and your head hurt. "Run every scan we have," Zolok ordered, his voice cracking like an adolescent's. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know what we're dealing with." Grix's massive fingers flew over his controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air on the bridge. "Sir, this doesn't make sense. The computer can't classify it. It's like the ship exists partially in our dimension and partially somewhere else. The readings are going crazy." The shadow ship moved closer, and that's when things started going wrong aboard the Shadow's Edge. The lights flickered once, then again. The steady hum of the engines began to stutter and fade. "Power levels dropping," called out Engineer Victar from his station. "We're losing energy across all systems, but I can't find the source of the drain." "Shields at 60% and falling," Grix reported, panic creeping into his voice. 40%, 20. "Sir, whatever that thing is doing, it's sucking the life right out of our ship." The bridge lights dimmed to emergency power, casting everything in an eerie red glow. One by one, the control panels began shutting down. The air recycling system gave a wheeze and went quiet. Even the artificial gravity started to fluctuate, making everyone feel dizzy and sick. "Life support failing," Victor called out, but his voice was getting weaker. I can't stay conscious." Zolok tried to reach for the emergency beacon, but his arms felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. His vision started to blur at the edges. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the shadow ship moving alongside them, close enough to touch. And there, etched in fading letters on the mysterious vessel's hull, was a name that shouldn't exist. A name from the old stories, the myths that spacers whispered about in bars across the galaxy. Prometheus. Captain Dong-hyun. Kim felt the cold metal of the cryogenic pod against his back as the lid slowly opened with a soft hiss. Steam poured out like ghostly fingers, and he took his first breath of recycled air in 3 months. The familiar tingle of returning consciousness spread through his body as his enhanced nervous system came back online. This was the part he hated most about long-range missions. Waking up always felt like crawling back from the dead. Around him, 49 other pods were opening in perfect sequence. The soft sounds of breathing and quiet groans filled the chamber as the last remnants of humanity's greatest failure began to stir. 800 years ago, they had been colonists aboard the New Horizon, heading for a new world beyond the edge of known space. Now they were something else entirely, something the galaxy wasn't ready for. "Status report, Hyejin," Dong-hyun called out, his voice still rough from the long sleep. He sat up slowly, his muscles protesting after months of inactivity. "Lieutenant." Commander So-young Hyejin was already standing, her movements fluid and precise. Unlike the others, she never seemed affected by cryo-sleep. Her enhanced neural implants glowed softly beneath her pale skin, thin lines of blue light that connected her directly to the ship's consciousness. When she spoke, it was with the calm certainty of someone who had access to all the ship's memories and sensors. "We've successfully processed another fleet, Captain," she reported, her dark eyes reflecting the soft glow from the control panels. 300 Malakari vessels now serve in our auxiliary wing. All crews are in stasis preservation, alive but dormant, dreaming peaceful dreams while their ships serve a better purpose. Dong-hyun swung his legs over the side of the pod and stood up, feeling the artificial gravity settle around him like a familiar blanket. He was tall for a human, but lean in the way that people became when they'd spent centuries adapting to life in deep space. His black hair was streaked with silver now, though he was only 45, a side effect of the genetic modifications that kept them alive in the void between galaxies. "Any resistance from the fleet commanders?" he asked, walking over to the main viewport that dominated one wall of the awakening chamber. "None that mattered," Hyejin replied, with a slight smile. The Prometheus drained their power cores before they could even charge their weapons. The conversion process was complete within 6 hours. No lives were lost. We don't kill, we preserve. The Prometheus was no longer the same ship that had left Earth 8 centuries ago. Back then, it had been called the New Horizon, a massive colony vessel carrying 50,000 hopeful settlers to a new world. But space had other plans. Stranded in the cosmic void between galaxies when their faster-than-light drive failed, the colonists had faced a choice: die slowly as their resources ran out, or adapt. They chose to evolve. The ship itself had become something alive, its hull infused with self-repairing nanotechnology that fed on quantum energy and stellar radiation. Where other species needed planets and stars to survive, the humans had learned to thrive in the empty darkness that killed everything else. The ship grew stronger in the void, its systems becoming more efficient, its consciousness expanding, and the humans aboard had changed too. Genetic modifications, neural implants, cybernetic enhancements. They had become something beyond their original species, while keeping their core humanity intact. They were still human where it mattered, in their love for their distant cousins back on Earth, and in their fierce protection of anything they considered family. "The Malakari expansion toward Earth space?" Dong-hyun asked, though he already knew the answer from the satisfaction in Hyejin's voice. "Terminated permanently," she confirmed. "Our converted fleet is broadcasting the warning on all frequencies, in 17 different languages. Any ship that approaches human territory will be given one chance to turn around. If they refuse, she shrugged, they join our growing family. Dong-hyun walked to the massive viewport and looked out at the sight that never failed to take his breath away. Hundreds of ships drifted in perfect formation around the Prometheus. Sleek Malakari battleships, heavy cruisers, fighter squadrons, and support vessels. They moved like schools of fish, turning and banking in precise coordination. Their hulls had been modified, enhanced with the same living technology that had transformed the Prometheus. Dark metal that absorbed energy, quantum drives that bent space itself, and crews sleeping peacefully in stasis while their ships served humanity's greater purpose. "Look at them," Dong-hyun murmured, pressing his palm against the cool, transparent steel. "Not destroyed, but reborn. Not conquered, but converted to serve something greater than war and conquest." Each ship in the fleet carried the dreams and memories of its original crew, preserved in perfect stasis. They weren't dead, they were simply waiting, dreaming of better times, while their vessels helped enforce peace across the galaxy. It was more merciful than what most species did to their enemies. "The other colony ships?" he asked. Hee-jin's smile widened. "The Magellan has secured the Rigel sector. The Discovery is handling pirate activity near the Vorthan Nebula, and the Endeavour..." She paused for dramatic effect. "The Endeavour just made contact with a Zephyrian battle group that was heading for the Sol system." Dong-hyun nodded with satisfaction. It was time their distant cousins back on Earth learned the truth. Humanity had never been alone in the galaxy. They'd been protected all along by family they'd forgotten existed. The age of human dominance hadn't begun. It had been quietly growing in the darkness for 800 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The Galactic Council chamber had never seen chaos like this. Representatives from dozens of species were shouting, screaming, and in some cases fleeing toward the exits. The carefully maintained order of centuries was crumbling in real time, and at the center of it all stood Ambassador Jaemin Park, as calm as a stone in a hurricane. His black uniform was perfectly pressed, his hands clasped behind his back, and his dark eyes showed not a hint of concern as the most powerful beings in the galaxy lost their minds around him. He looked like a man who had been expecting this moment for a very long time. "The reports are confirmed," Admiral Vextar announced, his four massive arms trembling as he read from a datapad. The proud military leader, who had commanded respect from every species in the galaxy, now looked like a scared child. 300 Malakari warships are moving in perfect formation toward the Centauri system, but they're not responding to any communication attempts from their home fleet. The holographic display above the chamber flickered to life, showing tactical feeds from across the galaxy. The images were terrifying in their impossibility. Massive battleships that should have been enemies were flying side by side, their movements synchronized like dancers in a deadly ballet. Fighter squadrons that belonged to different species were working together with mechanical precision. "They're broadcasting the same message on all frequencies," Commander Thys reported, her scaled skin rippling with fear. "The same words, over and over. Humanity's children have returned. Withdraw from human territories or join our fleet." The chamber erupted in fresh panic. The insect-like Vorthak clicked their mandibles in distress patterns. The crystalline Caltharians chimed with sounds like breaking glass. Even the proud Altarians, who claimed to be the oldest species in the galaxy, were whispering prayers to forgotten gods. But Commander Thys wasn't done. Her predatory yellow eyes locked onto Jaemin Park like targeting lasers. "You knew!" she hissed, her forked tongue flicking out to taste his scent. "You've been sitting there this whole time, calm. As death itself. You've been in contact with them all along." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ in the room focused on the human ambassador. Some species held their breath. Others didn't breathe at all, but stopped whatever they did instead. Jaemin Park nodded slowly, his expression never changing. "Yes," he said simply. "The Prometheus and her sister ships were never lost. They were simply growing, evolving. becoming something the galaxy desperately needed. "What do you mean?" Admiral Vextar demanded, his voice cracking like a teenager's. 800 years ago, humanity sent out dozens of colony ships to spread across the galaxy, Jamin explained, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Most of them reached their destinations and established the colonies you know about, but some went further. Some went beyond the edge of known space into the void between galaxies. He paused, looking around the room at the faces full of fear and confusion. They didn't die out there. They adapted. They evolved. They became something the galaxy has never seen before, protectors who could ensure peace through strength. "This is insane," shouted a delegate from the Regelian Confederation, his blue skin flushed with anger. "You're talking about people who've been missing for centuries. They can't just appear out of nowhere with super technology, can't they?" Jamin asked mildly. "Your own sensors detected energy readings that break every known law of physics. Your best warships are being converted into something beyond your understanding. Maybe it's time to accept that there are things in this universe you don't know about." Another delegate, this one from the Tau Ceti Alliance, stood up with his tentacles waving in agitation. "They're turning entire crews into vegetables. Thousands of soldiers and officers are in some kind of coma, while their ships are stolen." Jamin's expression hardened slightly. "The crews are preserved, not harmed. They're in perfect stasis, dreaming peaceful dreams while their ships serve a greater purpose. It's far more merciful than what most of you do to prisoners of war." "And what exactly is this greater purpose?" Commander Theiss demanded. "Peace," Jamin said simply. "Real peace. Not the fragile treaties and temporary ceasefires you've been managing for centuries. The kind of peace that comes when there's no choice but to cooperate." "You mean slavery," Admiral Vextar accused. "I mean evolution," Jamin corrected. "The alternative is simple. Respect human space and live in harmony, or become part of the solution to galactic conflict. Your choice." As if his words had been a signal, the space around the station began to shimmer like heat waves. The defensive sensors screamed warnings as massive shapes materialized out of nothing. Ships the size of cities appeared in perfect formation around the Galactic Council station, their hulls so black they seemed to absorb light itself. The Prometheus hung directly in front of the main viewport, dwarfing the station like a moon beside a pebble. Strange symbols pulsed along its hull with that same sickly green light that hurt to look at directly. And around it, dozens of other vessels materialized. The Magellan, the Discovery, the Endeavour, and ships with names that had been lost to history. Each one was crewed by humanity's transformed children, beings who had spent 8 centuries evolving in the darkness between galaxies. They had become something beyond human while remaining, fundamentally protective of their origins. "The galaxy is about to learn something important," Jamin said, his voice carrying over the sound of alarms and panicked breathing. "Humans were never the weak, scattered species you thought we were. We've been out there all along, growing stronger, becoming something you couldn't imagine." Through the viewport, more ships continued to appear, hundreds of them, thousands, an entire fleet that had been waiting in the darkness for the right moment to reveal itself. The age of human dominance wasn't beginning. It had been there all along, hidden and patient, waiting for the galaxy to need it. 6 months had passed since the day the galaxy learned that humans were not what they seemed. The Galactic Council chamber looked the same on the outside, but everything had changed. The air itself felt different, heavier, more careful, like everyone was walking on broken glass and trying not to make a sound. Where once there had been shouting matches and political arguments that lasted for days, now there was only quiet, respectful discussion. Representatives sat straighter in their chairs, spoke more softly, and nobody, absolutely nobody, talked about military action anymore. Half the galaxy's most powerful fleets now flew under human command, their crews sleeping peacefully in stasis while their ships enforced a peace that had seemed impossible just months before. The transformation had been swift and absolute. The Kaltharian Vorthak, war that had raged for 3 centuries, ended in a single day, when both fleets simply stopped fighting and began broadcasting surrender messages. Pirate attacks, which had plagued trade routes for thousands of years, had completely disappeared. Smugglers turned themselves in rather than risk encountering one of the ghost ships. Even the notoriously violent Rigelian raiders had sent formal apologies and disbanded their entire organization. Trade routes that had required military escorts for generations were now safer than walking through a garden. Merchant ships traveled freely through space that used to be deadly, protected by invisible guardians who appeared only when trouble started. Captain Dong-Hyun Kim materialized as a hologram in the center of the chamber, and the effect was immediate. Every conversation stopped. Every representative turned to face him. Even the proud Altarians, who usually acted like they were above everyone else, bowed their heads slightly in acknowledgement. He looked exactly the same as he had 6 months. Grr, tall, lean, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that seemed to see through everything. But now his presence carried weight that made the entire chamber feel smaller. Behind him, other figures began to appear, translucent but clearly visible. Captain Min-ho Park of the Magellan, Captain Soo-jin Lee of the Discovery, Captain Hae-jung Cho of the Endeavour, each one representing a human colony ship that the galaxy had thought lost forever. "The galaxy has peace now," Dong-hyun announced, his voice carrying easily through the chamber without him raising it even slightly. Real peace. Not the kind you pretended to have while building bigger weapons behind each other's backs. He gestured, and the holographic display above the chamber came to life. Star charts showed shipping lanes in green, all of them green, from the core worlds to the outer rim territories. No red zones, no danger areas, no contested space. Our fleets patrol every major space route, he continued. Pirates don't just avoid us. They surrender the moment they detect our ships on sensors. Wars don't escalate anymore because both sides know what happens to military fleets that refuse to stand down. Admiral Vextar, who had once commanded, the respect and fear of half the galaxy, now looked like a shadow of his former self. His 4 massive arms trembled slightly as he raised one hand to speak. "Captain Kim," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happens if a species decides they don't want this protection?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Every representative in the chamber held their breath, waiting for an answer they probably didn't want to hear. Dong-hyun's smile was colder than the space between stars. "Then they join the thousands of ships that already serve our cause. Their crews will be preserved in perfect stasis, dreaming pleasant dreams of better times, while their vessels help us maintain the peace they couldn't achieve on their own." Commander Thys, her scaled skin pale with fear, dared to ask another question. "And if an entire species refuses? If we unite against you?" "With what?" Captain Min-ho Park's hologram asked, his voice carrying dark amusement. "Half your fleets already fly under our command. The other half wouldn't dare fire on ships crewed by their own people, even if those people are sleeping." Ambassador Jaemin Park stood up from his seat in the human section, his movement drawing every eye in the chamber. For 6 months he had sat quietly, while the galaxy slowly realized the truth about humanity. Now it was time to make things completely clear. "The age of chaos is over," he announced, his voice carrying the same absolute authority as the captain's. "Humanity's lost children have returned to shepherd the galaxy towards something better. We've given you a choice. Embrace peace willingly, or become part of the solution whether you want to or not." Through the massive viewports that surrounded the chamber, the assembled delegates could see the proof of his words. Dozens of ships hung in space around the station, their hulls so black they seemed to eat light. They moved with impossible grace, bending the laws of physics to their will. And inside each one, crews of humans who had spent 8 centuries evolving beyond their original limitations, while keeping their protective instincts intact. The myths had been true all along. The ghost ships were real. Humanity had never been the scattered, helpless species that everyone believed them to be. As the council session ended, and representatives began filing out in unusually quiet groups, reports continued flooding in from across the galaxy. Ancient human colony ships were emerging from the cosmic deep, each one more advanced than the last. The Explorer had appeared in the Andromeda spiral, converting 3 different war fleets in a single engagement. The Pioneer was handling a territorial dispute in the Magellanic Clouds by simply placing both sides in stasis until they could learn to share. The galaxy was finally learning the truth. Humanity hadn't just spread among the stars centuries ago. They had become something far more dangerous and far more widespread than anyone had imagined. They had become the guardians that the galaxy needed, whether it wanted them or not. The age of human dominance hadn't begun with conquest or war. It had grown quietly in the darkness, patient and unstoppable, until the moment was right to step into the light. And now that it was here, resistance wasn't just futile, it was impossible. The end.